Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my colleague, Forbes staff writer, Zach Everson. Zach, thanks for coming on.
Hey, Brittany, thanks for having me back, especially as we're going to be talking about the Trump case, and my predictions on it were wrong. So I appreciate you having me back on.
Well, now you're here to break it all down for us because we do have a verdict finally. Well, it only took a few hours for the jury to decide, and the jury did find former President Donald Trump liable in civil court for sexually abusing writer E. Jean Carroll in a department store in the mid-90s. So can you walk us through the past 30 years, starting with the alleged incident back in the mid-90s to Tuesday when we got the verdict? How did we get here?
Sure, and it is finally, because as you said, this happened in the mid-90s, and E. Jean Carroll has made these allegations publicly for quite some time. But she claims that Donald Trump raped her in a dressing room of a department store, and she did not file any complaints at the time. She did tell some of her friends about these accusations, though, and it just because statute of limitations had expired, they weren't able to pursue criminal charges when she did feel comfortable talking about this publicly, and likewise for civil charges. But what New York did, I guess it was last year, was they passed a law that allowed people who had claims about sexual assault, sexual abuse, to come forward, and even if the statute had kind of put a hold on statute of limitations, saying, all right, those don't matter for right now, there's a little window where you can file charges. And E. Jean Carroll did that, filing civil court charges against Donald Trump for alleging rape, sexual abuse, and defamation. So she filed those, and I guess it was beginning of, was it 2021, I think? And she, it took a while for that to come to court with all the pretrial motions and all that stuff, but we did have the trial. Donald Trump famously chose not to testify. He said he would be there, but went overseas instead, which is kind of a standard play for presidents. When things aren't going well domestically, what's up? Foreign road trip. And Donald Trump went to go play golf at one of his overseas clubs. And anyways, yesterday, after just 3 hours of deliberations, the jury returned a guilty verdict on the sexual assault and defamation charges, did not return a guilty verdict on the rape.
So, and how much is she being awarded?
$5 million, which is, not a substantial sum generally, relatively, compared to somebody who's worth, I think we have him close to $3 billion now. Not a ton of money for him, but she's not going to see it anytime soon, I suspect. Trump has said he will appeal. He appeals everything. We're looking at several years probably before there's any sort of payout and final resolution in this case.
And the jury was made up of 6 men and 3 women, and they came to the verdict that he was liable. Can you explain why we're using the word liable and not guilty?
Sure. It is a civil proceeding, which has a lower level of burden to determine if the person is, if the defendant is committed the allegation or not. In a criminal case that has to be overwhelmingly, where here it's just kind of like 51% of the chance in a civil case that you've done this. So they found him liable. He's not going to jail. It's not a criminal case again. It's just he does have to pay her these fines, assuming the verdict holds up on appeal.
And if you can think back to the 2016 election, the first time President Trump ran for president, then Donald Trump, he, in October of 2016, the infamous Access Hollywood tape came out. And in that tape, for those who might not remember or don't know, he did say that he grabs, or you can grab women by the blank. How did that tape come into play here?
It appeared as evidence. E. Jean Carroll had made these allegations a while ago, and what he said on that Access Hollywood tape is almost exactly what she claimed. And they played it in court. And that's going to be one of the issues on which Trump's probably going to appeal based on some statements he's made, and that he's going to appeal the judge's decision to allow that into evidence. But, last I checked, I have not seen any jurors have come forward and talked to the media and explain the rationale for the verdict. But I got to imagine that Access Hollywood tape must have played a major role in it.
And you already said he is going to appeal. What else has been his response?
The other claim is that he's upset that the judge did not allow evidence about Democratic donor, LinkedIn founder Reid Hoffman having paid some of Carroll's legal bills. That was entered into evidence a few months ago, And he wanted that to come up in court, and it did not. And I think he's going to appeal the judge's decision there.
And so E. Jean Carroll was awarded $5 million. What has her response been since the verdict came out?
She put out a statement. She didn't really say much as she left the court, but later on she did put out a statement, saying that this was a win, not just for her, but for all survivors of sexual assault.
Zach, as we talk about every single time you're now covering over 40 investigations of Donald Trump. And when we talk about every one, I always ask you, how is this going to impact his political campaign? And I just want to talk about a poll that came out recently this week, a Washington Post ABC News poll, which shows him as the frontrunner of the 2024 presidential race, both above President Biden and the GOP second for our Florida governor, Ron DeSantis. So how is this going to factor in, if at all?
Well, I'm reluctant to make predictions, since my prediction that no jury would ever convict Trump of anything because there'd always be at least one holdout who was pro-Trump. That failed fantastically. So take this with a grain of salt. But I don't know if it will matter all that much. I saw another poll that came out recently stating that Trump voters would be welcome to somebody else running, but they don't see any current contender for the Republican nomination who makes them want to disavow Trump. You did not see the universal support for him that you saw with the criminal indictment, though, coming from Capitol Hill. When reporters were up there seeking comment, most Democratic members of Congress kind of walked by. Oh, I haven't seen it. I don't know, and just kind of shuffled away. Which stands out in remarked difference to the criminal one from Alvin Bragg. Because in that case, they did come out and say witch hunt and stand by the president. So we're seeing a little bit of a shift there, but whether that does anything with voters, I don't know. I mean, there's so many cases here. E. Jean Carroll has two against the former president that it's going to be overshadowed sooner or later by another case. We're going to see more verdicts. We're going to see at some point the Atlanta DA decide or Fulton County DA decide whether or not she wants to press charges. So, voters had some of this information out there already, as you mentioned, the Access Hollywood tape. I and most other Americans thought that was going to do him in 2016. And, as soon as we saw that, we thought it was game, set, match. And so did a lot of other Republicans, when they talked to him, advising him to step down and let somebody else run at that point. And they disavowed him, and it didn't matter. So, it'll be interesting to see if, this civil verdict pushes people over the edge that the Access Hollywood tape didn't.
I mean, the Access Hollywood tape was, I think, a turning point because people thought that was the October surprise. That was it. It was Hillary's race to win. That ended up not coming true, and voters still voted for Donald Trump. But you mentioned you're covering many cases, over 40 to be exact. What's next for Donald Trump in terms of those other investigations? What do people need to be keeping their eye out for?
Well, the Fulton County DA said that she'd announced early this summer whether or not she was going to investigate, whether or not she was going to bring charges against Donald Trump. That would obviously be a major case. It involves allegations that he interfered with the election. The other one to watch that's pressing is the Justice Department's look both at the documents that he kept at Mar-a-Lago and his efforts to overturn the election results as well. You're getting some reports out of, seeing the New York Times and the Washington Post are having some sources come out and say, what those investigations are looking at. And it sounds like those are proceeding, but we don't have any sort of timetable for those. And, the other case that I think most people are paying attention to, the criminal charges brought by the Manhattan DA, we're not due for next step in that until December. So there might be some stuff in between then, but we've got a little bit of a wait for anything substantive happens there, I suspect.
Zach Everson, per usual, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Brittany.